starting with the division winners from last season. That would be the Tennessee Titans. Forget that they were actually the 1 seed. I forget that. In the AFC, obviously lost to the Bengals in the divisional round. Very tough game for Ryan Tannehill. But nonetheless, some huge moves were made, especially in the wide receiver department. Obviously, Julio Jones, who they brought in last year, they released him. And then, obviously, the bigger news, traded wide receiver A.J. Brown to the Eagles. We already made a video about that. And then also lost guard Roger Saffold. And then in terms of the defense, which was, I believe, the number 1 ranked defense, it was a very good defense nonetheless. Lost cornerback Janoris Jenkins, linebacker Jayon Brown, and linebacker Rashawn Evans. But they brought in wide receiver Robert Woods, so maybe that will help with the loss of their 2 wide receivers. Tight end Austin Hooper, edge rusher DeMarcus Walker, drafted Treylon Burks, the wide receiver, in the first round. That was basically the Eagles' pick, if I remember correctly. And then drafted Roger McCreary in the second with their second-round pick. Also addressed offensive line with a tackle, but the more notable name they grabbed in the third round is going to be quarterback Malik Willis. So yeah, John, what are your thoughts, at least on the shuffle on wide receiver, and what do you expect from this Tennessee team this season?
Titans are a tough team to judge because, like we saw last year, they were able to get the number 1 overall seed despite Derrick Henry being out for a lot of the year. A.J. Brown deals with injuries. They don't have the most talented of offense outside of those 2 last year. Tannehill's a solid quarterback, but he's not Patrick Mahomes that's going to elevate other people. So it's really hard to judge how this transition is going to affect their offense because, honestly, with a healthy Derrick Henry back this year, they could be better than they were last year, considering they didn't have Henry. But even then, there was plenty of games that they didn't actually have to rely on their offense to win. I think back to when they played the Rams, their defense stepped up big with guys like Jeffrey Simmons making a big impact, Kevin Byard. So it's hard to judge how good the Titans really can be because we saw them get the 1 seed last year despite all these injuries and deficiencies. And so some of these people are going to be back like Derrick Henry, but then they also lose some major contributors like you talked about. So I still think the Titans are going to be a great team. I still think they're obviously a playoff contender. We're going to have to see. I think the big thing to watch out for is how efficient their offense is going to be. Does Derrick Henry stay healthy? He's had a ton of carries throughout his career. We saw that he got him hurt last year. Does that happen again? Do they start to mix in other running backs? Because the Titans, at least throughout Derrick Henry's career so far, since he took over for DeMarco Murray, have not really involved a lot of other running backs, especially on running downs. Do they maybe try to mix in other people and limit the carries that he gets to try and keep him fresher? If he's playing, is he still going to be playing at the same level? Because we know for running backs, injuries can often, at this point in their careers, maybe start to see them decline. We're seeing that with Ezekiel Elliott. He hasn't necessarily had that massive of an injury, but just over time, the wear and tear has seen him decline a little bit. And then with the receivers, A.J. Brown, I think, was incredibly underrated during his time with the Titans. He was actually one of the most efficient wide receivers, and what I mean by that was he wasn't getting as many opportunities as a lot of other elite receivers were, but he was still producing similar numbers. And so the way that he was able to have a big impact was through that efficiency. If he was not as good with the opportunities that he got, maybe like some other top tier receivers, then his numbers would be a lot lower, but he took advantage of the opportunities given to him. Will Robert Woods be able to do that coming off an injury? I don't know. Will Treylon Burks be able to do that, coming into the league and not really having a lot of experience and being a rookie? I don't know. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens because they're going from a team that had a lot of experience in the system, A.J. Brown, Julio Jones, guys like that, to 2 new receivers, and all of a sudden they draft Malik Willis, so Ryan Tannehill might be on the hot seat. I don't think that he's really at risk this year, but if they start off poorly and Malik Willis continues to have a good preseason, because at least as of time of recording, they've only played the first preseason game, and he looks pretty good. If he continues to have a hot preseason and maybe he's further along than a lot of people, us included, expected, I think you could potentially see Titans fans start calling for him to, win the starting job if they start off poorly. I don't expect them to because, once again, I think they're a playoff caliber team, and I think that they're They're just really solid defensively, coaching wise. There's not really like one true weakness that the Titans have. So I think their floors, they're competing for a wild card spot. Maybe they are one of those teams that misses out. They win like 9-10 games, something like that. But overall, I still think that they're probably the front, at least as of right now, the front runners for this division. It remains to be seen how big of an impact Matt Ryan has on the Colts, but we'll talk about that later. So that's how I feel about the Titans. Overall, I don't necessarily love or hate anything that they did in the offseason. I know that we had a video that kind of blew up about A.J. Brown trade, and it was a little bit clickbaity of a title. I'm a big fan of Treylon Burks, and so I think that he'll be a fine receiver, and to get him as your replacement for A.J. Brown, and you got Malik Willis as well, in the long term, they could be better. So we'll see what happens. But I still think the Titans, as of right now, are going to be a solid team, and I think they've set themselves up to be better in the future.
Yeah, I want to start with the offense, like you mentioned. Shuffling wide receivers. We mentioned in that video that you're referencing, the A.J. Brown trade video. Listen, Treylon Burks, very unlikely he's going to come in and be exactly A.J. Brown. Like, it's going to take time if he does. So, I mean, there's already, some reports in camp he's not off to the strongest start, but hey, it's camp. Some guys, I mean, I think, I know it's completely different guys, but Jamar Chase, remember he was struggling in camp last year, dropping balls, and then all of a sudden we all saw what happened last year. Obviously, he was the number one receiver in his draft, and for a good reason. So, yeah, I think, like you mentioned, most of it's going to be on Robert Woods. He's already kind of been used to a high workload with his time at the LA Rams. But obviously, you mentioned it's an ACL injury. I know people come back from that, with relative ease nowadays, but it's important to factor in his age. He's in his early 30s, so may lose a step or something, or still may not. It may take him a while to get, maybe half the season to get back to his number one, or back to where he was. So, but yeah, you made a good point last year though, is that the Titans still found ways to win. Very well coached team. Obviously, like I mentioned, number one defense. Their defense really kind of was a saving grace. They leaned on that, and then it was on the other side. Ryan Tannehill, hey, manage the game, maybe make a play or two with your legs or your arm, especially without Derrick Henry. But yeah, I am interested to see how Derrick Henry, if he can bounce back to be his typical self, just because a foot injury for a running back his size and in his late 20s. It's always concerning, like you mentioned. You never know when the treads start falling off the tire. And they lost. Another guy they lost was Deontay Foreman, who filled in pretty well for Derrick Henry last year. Now, granted, we always say running backs are a dime a dozen. They may have drafted, or they may have someone else coming up the ranks that they feel can be, can take that role if necessary. But yeah, that is one of my concerns, is just general offensive depth, and then especially if the wide receivers don't pan out, that could be a concern. But nonetheless, I'm with you. I think there's still going to be a playoff team. Still a very good, very deep defense too. Got very good cornerback room. They're going to get back Caleb Farley, their first round pick, who I loved last year. So yeah, and then like I mentioned, they did draft Roger McCreary, who's reportedly had a solid camp too. So cornerback, especially in a passing league, and it's very smart of them. They have to face Josh Allen. They're going to have to go through the Bengals, and they're probably going to have to go through the Chiefs, loading up at talented corners. It's kind of like the New England-y thing to do, and obviously Mike Vrabel coming from New England. And then, yeah, last point I want to throw to, I mean, Mike Vrabel is just so underrated, and I think more appreciation needs to go his way, because like we mentioned, they lost Derrick Henry. If you had told both of us, hey, they're going to lose Derrick Henry for most of the year, Julio Jones isn't going to work out really at all, and A.J. Brown's going to be in and out, I think we both say, well, they probably won't make the playoffs last year. And not only did they make the playoffs, and probably some would argue the better conference, they were the 1 seed. And hey, they did lose to the Bengals, but hey, the Bengals were the Super Bowl champs, so not bad of a loss, as they were right there at the end too. Not bad of a loss as it may seem. So
also, we'll see in that game, that was like the Bengals' worst performance in probably the last 3 months of the season, because I think they held them to 19 points. I don't think Joe Burrow even threw a touchdown. Like the Titans' defense,
that's the game he got sacked by 9 times or something. It was a record.
Yeah, it was a lot. So the Titans, their defense showed up to play. Derrick Henry literally just came off that injury too. So that's why I think there could be some pressure going on Ryan Tannehill in this upcoming season. Didn't have the greatest end of the year. They draft Malik Willis. Once again, still think his job is safe because we both agree that Malik Willis is incredibly raw. But overall, yeah, the Titans, they're a very well-coached, underrated team, especially I think their defense is incredibly underrated. People don't think of them as being like one of the best defensive teams in the league because they don't have like a lot of the big flashy names. Like you even think of Kevin Byard. We talked about it in our safety rankings. He was actually the highest graded safety in the entire NFL last year. And I see a lot of people leave him off their top 5 lists. Like he just doesn't get the respect he deserves. I think Jeffrey Simmons doesn't get the respect he deserves.
Yes.
This team is really just thought about as Derrick Henry, and that was it. Maybe some, people even thought about A.J. Brown, but nobody really talks about the other guys a lot. So the Titans, they definitely deserve more respect.
And also, don't forget, they signed Bud Dupree, who was still recovering from his ACL injury last year, so it's likely he's going to be probably better already just to start the year as opposed to last year. So they already have a lot of areas where they can improve just off the bat, where they'll be better. So, we'll see. I think Ryan Tannehill, like I said, his job will be fine.